On May 10th, 1940, the Netherlands woke up to the sound of war. Within hours, German paratroopers seized bridges deep behind Dutch lines, while panzer columns punched across every border crossing. In just 5 days, a nation that had stayed neutral through the entire First World War would be forced to surrender. What made the collapse so terrifyingly swift? Before dawn on May 10th, the quiet Dutch border erupted under the treads of German armour. At 2:45 in the morning, the first panzer columns surged over the frontier near Roosendaal, engines roaring as they poured across the open fields and railway viaducts. Dutch sentries at the Breda to Roosendaal checkpoint barely had time to sound the alarm before tanks swept past, followed by mechanised infantry and half-tracks. Simultaneously, another armoured wave crossed at Enschede in the northeast at 4:30 in the morning, overwhelming the thin Dutch outposts along the Twente Canal. Within minutes, the defenders at the International Rail Bridge were forced aside, and the 9th Panzer Division pressed west on Highway 35, their sights set on the IJssel line. The speed was staggering. By midday, the southern spearhead had covered nearly 115 kilometres, reaching the Moerdijk Causeway and threatening the vital Wilhelmina Canal crossing at Breda. In the north, the 9th Panzer Division had advanced 85 kilometres, already approaching Hengelo and the Dutch defensive heartland. The Dutch High Command scrambled to redeploy reserves, but the twin axes of the German attack left little time for coherent resistance. Reports flooded in, bridges lost, border posts overrun, armoured columns fanning out toward Rotterdam and the interior. Stuka dive bombers circled overhead, pounding Dutch strongpoints and clearing the way for the advancing panzers. The ground shook with the constant rumble of engines and the distant crack of gunfire. Behind the lines, Dutch civilians awoke to the sound of war, radios crackling with urgent warnings as columns of smoke rose on the horizon. In less than 8 hours, the Wehrmacht had shattered the frontier, opening the roads that would allow airborne troops to strike deep into the country. The Dutch army, still mobilising, now faced a battle moving at the speed of machines, a battle that was already slipping out of their control. Before the sun reached the horizon, a new kind of war descended from the sky. At 4 a.m, the first waves of German Ju-52 transport planes swept over the Netherlands, engines droning low over the fields and rooftops. Paratroopers of General Kurt Student's Fallschirmjäger leapt into the darkness, their parachutes blooming against the pre-dawn sky. Their targets were precise: Ypenburg, Ockenburg and Valkenburg, airfields ringing the Hague, and the vital Moerdijk railway bridge to the south. At Ypenburg, German paratroopers hit the runway in staggered bursts, quickly overwhelming the startled Dutch defenders. For a few chaotic hours, the airfield fell under German control. But Dutch counterattacks, fueled by confusion and fury, would soon turn the ground into a killing field, scattering the invaders and retaking the terminal by midday. Ockenburg saw a similar storm. Navigation errors dropped some gliders onto the sand dunes of the Hollands Dieppe, but enough troops landed to ignite fierce fighting around the airstrip. Valkenburg's grassy landing ground was seized within minutes, only to become a trap as Dutch infantry and hastily armed civilians closed in. South of Rotterdam, at 5 a.m, gliders released at 800 metres skimmed over Rozenburg Island. Their cargo included teams trained to seize the Moerdijk Bridge before Dutch engineers could set off demolition charges. By 7:20 a.m, the bridge was in German hands, intact, opening a direct artery for armoured columns racing up from the border. At Walhaven Airfield, heavy anti-aircraft fire ripped into the descending paratroopers, but a handful reached the ground, sowing panic in the city's southern districts. Each landing behind Dutch lines split the country's defences, paralysing communications and sowing fear far from the front. Radios blared frantic messages: enemy troops in the rear, bridges lost, airfields under attack. Officers found themselves cut off, their commands drowned out by the shock of war arriving from above. The Dutch army, trained for a ground fight, now faced chaos raining down from the clouds. The invasion was no longer just at the borders, it was everywhere at once. On the wooded slopes of the Grebbeberg, Dutch infantry and artillery units braced themselves against the oncoming storm. May 12th brought no pause, only the relentless hammer of German attacks. Soldiers crouched in shallow trenches, rifles clenched, as shells ripped through the morning fog. Machine gun fire rattled from camouflaged bunkers, tracing arcs across the narrow approaches. Men shouted orders above the roar, their uniforms streaked with dirt and sweat, faces drawn tight with exhaustion. The enemy pressed forward in waves, supported by tanks and Stuka dive bombers that seemed to tear the very earth apart. Each assault was beaten back at enormous cost. Dutch gunners fired until their barrels glowed, reloading by touch when vision failed. Medics dragged the wounded to makeshift aid posts behind the line, but many never made it back. In a single day, nearly 130 Dutch defenders were killed, and over 400 were wounded. The air stank of cordite and blood, and every lull felt like a warning, not a relief. Veterans later recalled the chaos, the splintered trees, the sudden silence after a shell, the desperate hope that reinforcements might arrive. Yet even as positions fell one by one, the defenders held, buying precious hours. Every yard of ground cost lives. The Grebbeberg became a symbol of sacrifice, a place where ordinary men faced the full violence of modern war, refusing to yield until there was nothing left to give. The stand at Grebbeberg, though doomed, forced the German advance to pause. For nearly 2 days, Dutch soldiers clung to the battered ridge, refusing to break under the weight of tanks and relentless bombing. When General Winkelmann finally ordered a retreat late on May 13th, the battered remnants pulled back in exhaustion, their uniforms torn and faces hollowed by sleepless nights. But those hours of resistance had not been wasted. Each moment bought at Grebbeberg allowed the Dutch government to weigh impossible choices, to debate, to hope for Allied relief, to decide whether to risk further destruction or to surrender. The brief hold on the ridge sent ripples through Dutch high command, delaying the German timetable and forcing Berlin to recalculate. Yet as the battered defenders fell back, it became clear that the cost had been enormous. The momentum, once slowed, now shifted back to the invaders. With the front collapsing and the roads to the west wide open, the fate of the Netherlands was slipping from the hands of its leaders. The exhaustion of those who fought at Grebbeberg was mirrored in the halls of government, where the weight of the decision pressed in. The hours gained on the ridge were precious, but the price was paid in blood and hope. At 9 o'clock in the morning on May 14th, a German envoy arrived at the Dutch lines in Rotterdam, carrying a stark ultimatum: surrender the city or face total destruction from the air. Colonel Johan Charoux, the Dutch commander, listened as the demand was read, a threat not just against soldiers, but against the entire civilian heart of Rotterdam. The deadline was set for 1 o'clock in the afternoon. In the tense hours that followed, Charoux and his staff scrambled to consult with higher command, desperate to buy time, hoping for intervention or at least a delay. Telegrams flashed between headquarters, each minute thick with dread as the city's fate hung in the balance. Civilians unaware of the looming deadline moved through streets already scarred by days of fighting, while Dutch negotiators pleaded for an extension, arguing for more time to evacuate the wounded and the helpless. But the German lines remained unmoved, and the clock ran down. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, with negotiations unresolved, the sky over Rotterdam darkened as nearly 90 Heinkel Hu-111 bombers from Kampfgeschwader 30 approached. Orders to abort the attack were sent too late, a fatal gap in communication. Bomb bay doors opened, and within moments high explosives rained down on the city centre, sealing Rotterdam's fate in a single, irreversible act. Rotterdam's heart burned for hours. Flames leapt from the shattered city centre, swallowing nearly 1 square mile of homes, churches, warehouses, entire streets erased in a single afternoon. Around 850 civilians lost their lives, and almost 25,000 were left without shelter, carrying what they could through choking smoke and falling ash. The firestorm's heat warped steel and turned stone to rubble. For survivors, the world had changed in minutes. General Henry Winkelmann, Commander-in-Chief, faced the ruins from his headquarters. The city's destruction was not just a tragedy, it was a warning. The Luftwaffe had shown what more resistance would bring, annihilation not just for soldiers, but for every family and every city in the Netherlands. Winkelmann knew his army, battered and exhausted, could not stop the German advance. The Dutch defences had been designed for another age, with fixed lines, slow mobilisation and a belief that neutrality might hold. Against Blitzkrieg, these hopes collapsed. German tanks and mechanised infantry moved faster than orders could travel. Paratroopers landed behind the lines, cutting off escape and shattering communications. Stuka bombers silenced strongpoints before defenders could react. By the morning of May the 15th, Winkelmann saw no choice. To fight on would mean more Rotterdams, more fire, more death. The decision to capitulate was made. In just 5 days, a nation fell, and 5 years of occupation began. Cities turned to ash, lives upended in hours, and shockwaves still echo across generations. Speed and terror overwhelmed not just defences, but hope itself. Today, we witness how quickly peace can shatter. In just 5 days, a nation fell, and 5 years of occupation began.